Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you show
Thornton.
Yeah, I mean, I got him at 2.
Chris
Hearing
Dowhouse,
about these are pointless in fantasy in the sense.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
All right. Welcome in Operation Domination. It's Wildcard round preview. We got it all for you folks. We got the DFS angle. We'll have Chaz Filardi from Sports Betting Weekly on in the second half of the show to talk about all our bets. And I got a lot of player props deep dive into, make sure we had something for at least every single game. And of course, we're still getting ready for the offseason with our Dynasty Domination segments. But first up, just so you guys know, well, first of all, I'm Dan Mader. I'm joined here with Chase Thornton and Adam LaRue. Chris D is MIA at the moment. We'll see if he hops on at some point. But we want you guys to join in on the action, on the fun for fantasy playing through the playoffs. So we got an offer for you. If you join the Fantasy Football Advice Network Playoff Challenge League, for free, I might add. We partnered up with Smash Up Fantasy Sports to get this great offer out to you. We're going to have weekly winner payouts for up to $100. There's a grand prize of $1,000 to the first overall place team at the end of the Super Bowl. So it's a league throughout the entire playoffs with weekly winners. It's absolutely free. No credit card needed to play. And it's actually playing DFS with a $50,000 budget like you would on DraftKings, like you would on FanDuel. But it has a little bit of a twist. You get these power-up cards to get certain players, certain bonuses and stuff like that. It's actually pretty cool. I'm signed up along with everybody else, the Fantasy Football Advice crew, so you can go ahead and take us on. Again, it's absolutely free. All you have to do, hit the link. I have it in the comments here in the live stream. If you're not in live stream, make sure you're following at FF Advice Network on social media. You can see our posts and hit the link there as well. And again, absolutely free to play. Shout out to Smash Up Fantasy Sports. So now we got that out of the way for the action that we're offering you guys for the playoffs. We got to talk a little breaking news here because it was Black Monday. So all of the coaches were finally on the carousel. All right, so I'm not going to have us react to all of this because we are going to have a coaching changes impact, at least segment episode like we normally do in the offseason to kind of help kick things off. But I do want to at least mention it in case you haven't heard maybe one of these. So Doug Pedersen, he's out. That was expected. Although Trent Baalke keeping his job, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Jerod Mayo, he's fired. He's gone after one season. The Seahawks fired offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, which I was a little bit surprised by that they moved on for him after only a year. Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen both stay for the New York Giants. That one we are going to react to in a little bit. Antonio Pierce fired. Not totally surprising, although he was definitely set up to fail anyway. The Jets interviewing literally everyone around the world, and I got to get a reaction as far as who they interviewed so far. So those are the two we're going to talk about. The Bengals fired defensive coordinator and their offensive line coach. No surprises there. Ken Dorsey out for the Cleveland Browns. I think Stefanski wants to take everything back over. And Nick Sorensen out as DC for the San Francisco 49ers. Oh, and let's not forget Gus Bradley also out for those Indianapolis Colts on the DC side. I think Adam and I are both happy with those changes thus far. But let's get to the ones that I really wanted to react to, which is the Giants keeping Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. I'm not totally surprised they kept Brian Daboll. There had been a lot of talk. The players love him, and there was a lot of feeling that the ownership group and the New York Giants did like Brian Daboll. But I am surprised that they kept Joe Schoen because he hasn't really done much as a GM as far as acquiring the personnel. So, Adam, I'm going to go to you first. Let me get your reaction on this. What was your take? What was your instant reaction to this news?
Yeah, I was kind of bracing myself for this to happen, to be honest with you. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to fire your GM and then have that GM tied to a coach that they aren't able to select. So if you're keeping Daboll, I thought it kind of made sense to keep Schoen. I think the other part of it that makes sense to me is that there's not really, like, you can't solve the Giants this offseason. I'm sorry, you can't. The quarterback free agent market is not in a position where you can do it. And then they won against the Colts, so they're not picking early enough that they're getting, likely at least getting, one of the guys that can actually help you this year in, depending on the person, your top two quarterbacks. So I don't think you can solve the Giants, so why not run it back? And if you're keeping Daboll, why pair him with a GM that, didn't have a choice? So I'm not surprised, but I'm not optimistic about the Giants by any means.
No, I think the crazy thing is that Mark comes out in his conference and yeah, we're keeping him, but immediately, like, I have no patience, just so you all know. So just so you know, you're coming in next year on the hot seat immediately in week 1. Which, not that they play themselves kind of out of having a top 2 draft pick, which means they might not get a shot at the only quarterbacks, in my opinion, that could possibly have first round grades anyway, and Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. But by saying that, even if they did have a top 2 pick, I think you're putting them in a situation where they wouldn't go rookie quarterback anyway, because clearly they have to find a way to win some games in order to have any chance of keeping their jobs heading into next season. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Giants are going to do, because they're going to have to be in on the veteran free agent market, maybe through a trade. And sometimes you can self-destruct an organization if you make them too desperate. So I just think it's an interesting kind of dilemma there going on with the Giants with the way they've kind of handled that situation. The other one is, the Jets, of course. I know we're talking about both New York teams. I'm not even a New York fan, but it's just that these are the two situations that were most interesting to me that I felt we need to react to. So the Jets interviewing everyone, including Arthur Smith and Matt Nagy. And Chase, when I saw that they were interviewing Arthur Smith and Matt Nagy, I'm like, this is the definition of insanity. Let's bring in literal offensive coordinators who are punchlines at one point in their careers, and let's interview them for this Jets job. What's your take on that thing?
Well, it doesn't do anything for me in terms of, my optimism for the future of the Jets offense or as a team as a whole. I mean, we've already seen Nagy and Arthur Smith run teams basically into the ground as head coaches. I'm not sure what they're thinking there. But we haven't been sure what they've been thinking for most of the last 5 decades or so. I mean, to be dead honest with everybody, and they interviewed the guy that used to have the job 10 years ago. And he said, "Oh, I'll come into town. I'll shape it up. I'll get Rodgers under control. We'll not be a little country club anymore." You've never coached a personality like Aaron Rodgers, my friend. And you probably never will. I don't think he gets that job either, but it's just, what an interesting screwy situation. And they still don't seem to have any direction, and they don't seem ready to pick anybody who will give them a direction. And therein lies the problem. I think it's a literal top-down rot in that organization, and it doesn't look to be changing anytime soon because the head is still going to be there. So good luck, New York.
And this is what I thought the funniest part is that Woody Johnson was in Florida. He wasn't even there for the end of season presser. You leaving Jeff Ulbrich, who everybody knows is not going to be a Jet next year. Like, I know he's technically under contract, but he's gone as soon as they hire somebody else. And he left him to pretty much have this post-game conference, end of year review with the media. What's he going to say? I'm not going to be here in a week. Who cares? It's absolutely ridiculous, the whole thing about it. But that is the Jets organization. I'll tell you what, if I was a Jets fan, I would take Rex Ryan over Arthur Smith and Matt Nagy. Just like I would do it.
I would too, but again, like I'm saying, just keep retreading things. And for him to come out, if I don't know what their plan, they don't know what their plan is for quarterback next year either. But if that plan is Aaron Rodgers, it's not a good thing for the presumptive, or at least he assumes that he's the presumptive favorite to come in the door, to already, piss off Aaron Rodgers, because we all know his personality and how he's going to take something like that before you even walk in the door with him. It just, again, that organization has no actual direction, and I don't think they're going to for quite a while.
Well, and the issue that they're really having, just to put a bow on this whole thing, is that it's not an attractive job. So it's going to be a retread who takes the New York Jets head coaching job, because it's not an attractive job for the top candidates who are being floated about, like Ben Johnson, like Brian Flores. Like, it's not a good place for them to go. So they're not going to go there. So it's going to be a retread in New York again, and probably the same result as it's always been. But let's jump into some more offseason talk and dynasty temperature check.
hot so hot in here.
Yes. So we are going to continue shopping at the running back position. Last week, we talked about some players who are currently in the NFL, who, if you have a need at the running back position, say you feel like you're a step away in those dynasty teams, or you're a contender and you're just looking to get younger at the running back position, but you've been contending already. Effectively, anyone who, you're going to be chasing a championship next season. We've talked about it before. Typically, running back is that last position that you're attacking, but maybe, your rebuild went really well and you're ready to start going in this offseason. Like I said, we looked at our veteran options at the running back position last week. This week, we're going to give you a glimpse at some of the rookies. Now, I'm still working through my watch list. I'm about halfway done, but this is a running back class where halfway done means I've watched more running backs than I watched in the entirety of last season, right? Like my watch list for this year's class is like 30 deep, right? And I watched maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I probably watched no more than 20 running backs last year. We were pushing it by the end of guys that were, not going to make rosters. And these are guys who are certainly much more interesting. It does look like we're going to get Chris in here real quick. So
it says Amber, but I promise you it is Chris D on the screen.
Absolutely. So we have split the running back position two ways. This is our tier 2 and 3 potential options. And then we're just going to take a peek at the first tier, functionally Ashton Genty and the other guys who we think are really high end backs, maybe first round grades or guys that were at least, looking at the early second round. So Chris, how do you want to shake this out?
Well, I think if we can kick off with some of the tier 2, tier 3 guys, some of the guys that you were looking at as the strong RBs, definitely the RB2s, maybe even RB1 kind of, potential. Talking about some of this draft class and this past draft class, I should say. And there's any guys that kind of jump out to you, Adam, that, we saw some guys kind of step up from this draft class, but a lot of guys didn't necessarily, get the chance to shine the way they thought they would a chance to get to, but like somebody like a Benson, is any guys there you think might take the leap into this next, tier? Maybe people should target now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say as far as last year's class. I think, to your point, Benson's a guy who's definitely interesting. Yeah, last year's guy I think we covered pretty well last week.
Gotcha. How about guys that like you talk about, like Isaiah Pacheco, a guy that is a strong RB, but maybe has injury concerns. Maybe the Chiefs could also move on to contract year, last year's deal. So somebody like that, is there someone that maybe you're looking to keep, or maybe you're looking to move on from?
Yeah, Pacheco is definitely someone who I'm super high on this upcoming year. No doubt. I don't think the situation's changed all that much, other than an injury that it's pretty successful coming back from. So I'm not super worried about Pacheco moving forward. I know it hasn't been great him coming back this season, but I think in the long term he'll be fine.
And then some other. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, we did have a question come in, speaking of Ashton Genty a little bit, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, but shout out to MA football guy for chiming in. You think you'll be able to get Genty at the 105 or the 208? I mean, in your wet dreams, maybe you get him at the 208, but even at the 105, what do you guys think?
I don't think so. I think as soon as maybe if someone really falls for one of the quarterbacks, they go first. But outside of that, I would be shocked to see many leagues, even in Superflex, where he goes anywhere past 103 as far as Dynasty is concerned. 105 might be about where he's going in redraft, to be honest with you. So
depending on the landing spot, that's not far off. If you get a Superflex, and if you got a couple dudes in front of you who are desperate for quarterback and fall in love with receivers. But 105, yeah, you're probably going to have to come up from there if you want.
Yeah, maybe you can shake it at 3, 4 if you're really lucky. But
so no one's concerned about his performance in the playoffs.
No,
I'm just throwing it out there. Okay, I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I'm not concerned either, but there was, there's always that Twitter thing where it's going on with all the recency bias. It's like, oh, but Bo Scatterborough, he did he did this, and so I just wanted to throw it out there, just real quick. Go ahead, move on.
Well, Adam, you sort of talked about a lot about this draft class, but I think guys that are as RB2 and maybe could be RB1, so we may talk about this next segment. But a guy like Tyrone Tracy Jr., Bucky Irving, two guys who kind of shined out this year. Are those guys that you're confident next year are going to be at least RB2 or flex options, or you think they could actually take a step higher and maybe be some guys that maybe want to buy lower on this in a sense and have an RB1 option?
Well, Tracy to me is a big winner in this staff not leaving. There's not a lot of those that are win because Daboll's staying and because Schoen's staying, but Tracy's one of them in the sense that this is the regime that drafted him, and we've seen a bunch of times where running backs who didn't have a lot invested in them kind of get switched out when the regime changes, right? So he is a benefactor there. So happy there, and I think Bucky's a similar situation there. That obviously we weren't worried about, his team switching out, but just in the sense that this is a team with a lot of veterans. They've got a lot of money to spend. They've definitely got holes on defense that they can fix. I just don't think that they've got any reason to go after the running back position when they've definitely got some options on their roster to keep moving forward. And as much as, look, I didn't like Bucky Irving coming into the draft. I mean, we know that, those of us who have been watching for a while, and obviously us up here. But he's been good. He's great vision, has accelerated really well, has been a great third down back. So, I mean, look, I think he's the best back that they have at this point. It certainly has more upside than someone like Rachaad White, who has shown to be very limited, at least as his upside as a runner. So I think Bucky Irving is someone that you feel confident about as well.
Well, Adam, talking about upside, are you concerned this is RB1 upside, or are we talking about just kind of what we got as an RB2 flex option? Because this guy was, by the end of the season, an RB1 in your roster, and with people kind of confident, riding him out there. So you're talking about a guy still splitting time with Rachaad White, maybe some other backs in rotation. Are you worried about the rotation, or do you think this guy's a strong option as your true RB1?
I mean, I don't know that he's ever a workhorse bell cow back, but I do think that he leads this backfield, and I would be shocked to see someone come in here and upend that. Now, there's some really talented rookies that we're going to talk about who it could do it. But again, this is a team with not a lot of incentive to go add to this backfield, even if or when Rachaad White's out of there. There's just not a lot of incentive to add much more in this backfield. So I think he's fairly safe. Not completely safe. There is some risk. But I think you're more likely looking to a high-end RB2, low-end RB1 than you are anything else.
Now, these guys have been RB2s for a little bit while now. I get a little older in the tooth, but they're due to be free agents. Aaron Jones is going to set to be a free agent. So is Javonte Williams. So is Nick Chubb. These are three guys that, people have had in their roster. What are you doing with those three guys? And are you looking at anybody kind of, moving forward to replace them?
Javonte's someone interesting. I think his offseason's one that really just has to be watched. It's hard to make any confident observations as far as Javonte. I think he's a good runner. I think he put good tape out there this year. I think he also put some not so good tape out there this year. It was definitely hot and cold with him. But I think on the whole, you feel good about him getting away from the injury, getting a little bit further out and looking a lot more athletic. Nick Chubb, opposite. Obviously, to me, never looked particularly good this season. It is a severe enough injury that at his age, there's certainly a chance that it never comes back. But, if there's anyone who does, it's probably him. But not a lot of optimism for me with Nick Chubb. And then who was our third back there?
We also had Javonte, like I said, Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, another guy that's hitting free agency. So you got a lot of different guys who hitting free agency. Are you holding on to these guys and kind of waiting, Adam, or are you trying to pull the trigger early?
Yeah, Aaron Jones, for me, for example, is someone that I just don't think there's not enough juice to really sell him. I don't think you're going to get what you're going to get from just holding him on your roster. If you're really falling apart, then maybe you try to find something, if your dynasty team just completely falling apart. But if there's any chance you're even sniffing competitive team next year, you're keeping Aaron Jones to me. And I think the same is for J.K. Dobbins.
All right, before we get to the draft class and a little touch for, some taste, some of the RB1s, Adam, what are we doing with Christian McCaffrey next year? Is Christian McCaffrey a guy that we feel confident is still going to be an RB1, or is this guy that maybe we're trying to unload this offseason?
I think he's another one where you're scared. I think it's a riskier version of Aaron Jones in the sense that you're scared about it for sure. I think there is real concern, but at the same breath, like what you're going to get for selling Christian McCaffrey at this point in Dynasty is not nearly worth enough for the potential upside of him keeping him and him continuing to get the workload that he's gotten. He looked the best this season that he had played in the game that he ultimately got hurt and knocked out for the season. I think he looked pretty good in that game, to be honest with you. And look, based on the contract, he's going to continue to be there. He's probably going to continue to get a hell of a workload. And even if he's not 100% himself from last season, I mean, he hits 90%, and you're still probably talking about an RB1 that you really don't want to sell at his current market value. So I think you're holding on to Christian McCaffrey.
All right. And then one last guy to talk about for our shopping list. Is this guy an RB1 next year, or is this guy still something that to be determined? Chase Brown is a guy that basically was the Kyren Williams 2.0 for Cincinnati this past year. Was heavily involved in the red zone, heavily involved in the passing attack and rushing attack. Is Chase Brown a guy that I can feel confident as an RB1, or maybe a guy we're trying to buy on our shopping list, Adam? Or is Chase Brown somebody that you're kind of confident maybe sticking to RB2, flex range?
Chase Brown is someone who the market's going to be interesting for him this offseason in Dynasty. I think it's going to be real hard to buy him. He's going to be expensive. There's not a lot of really young running backs that are impactful as both a runner and a receiver on good teams with good quarterbacks. And look, he was effective as a runner with a piss-poor offensive line. I mean, Alex Kappa was graded out as one of the worst linemen in the NFL this season. And Chase Brown still looked great. I'm definitely confident in him. This is, it's a simpler situation to Tampa Bay in the sense that there's just no incentive to replace at the running back position for them. Like, why they can't afford to spend, they can't afford to draft elsewhere because they have a lot of holes that they need to fill on the offensive line and on the defense and really everything other than their handful of star players. And boy, they can't waste it on running back when they already have a really good one. And the one thing I'll say as far as the Kyren Williams comparison is, I love Kyren Williams. I've been accused of being biased towards some of these Notre Dame's running backs. But look, they came in with similar draft capital. That's a fair comparison. And obviously, I know you're getting at the fantasy implications and that comparison. But the difference with Chase Brown is that type of guy. He's a real athlete. I mean, this isn't the Kyren Williams or the Bucky Irving where they were late in the draft because of their athleticism. This is a real, the athletic profile matches everything else we're seeing. So I think with Chase Brown, you're really confident.
Hey, Chase, do you remember when you used to argue with me about Zach Moss for Chase Brown? Just wanted to throw that in there real quick.
Remember, I wasn't alone. Because again, I still don't think they would have. I don't think they knew what they had in Chase Brown yet. I think they discovered it and they learned in a damned hurry, which is good for them and it's good for the future.
Well, before we get throwing some stuff at you. No, well, to that point, real quick, before we move on to the draft class, do you guys have right now is Bijan Robinson our consensus RB1? Real quick, yes or no?
Yeah, probably.
Dan, Chase?
Yeah.
RB1 overall?
Yeah, RB1.
I mean, in Dynasty, certainly.
That's what I'm asking.
It's pretty much between him and maybe you could argue Brees in Dynasty. Like, that's your end of conversation. And to me, it's Bijan, especially with how, I'm really optimistic with what I saw out of Penix. I think this offense is only going to get better with him at quarterback. So,
well, I'll throw that one in there, especially since I've been a Bijan lover for forever, is that finally the Falcons woke up and started utilizing him much better after coming out of the bye, more so like a bell cow RB1 down the stretch, where before Algier was involved enough to just be annoying, especially inside the 5-yard line. That went away, and Bijan was the number 2 running back only to Saquon Barkley over the second half of the season, actually. So I think we've kind of seen him start to take that and move forward. We got to get real quick though. I'm gonna bring Chaz in. Chaz, fix your mic there for a second, and then we'll bring you in because I get to double hear me on that one. But we got to get to the DFS cocktail hour real fast.
All right. Yeah. Hey, here we go. NFL regular season's behind us. Playoffs are here. DFS is still rolling. one of the fun things kind of about breaking down matchups and the like during the playoffs, you're going to get fewer of those matchups where it's like a strength versus like a true weakness for a team. Because by default, the teams that are left are the best teams in it. And they don't have a whole lot of true weaknesses, but let's dive into it. Now, I know some of you are going to think I'm lazy. Some of you are going to think I'm nuts here, but we are going to go right back to the well this week. We're going to play Baker Mayfield and Jalen McMillan again. And you were not feeling great about this through the first 3 quarters last week. But lo and behold, that's why they play 4 quarters. When the dust settled last week, Baker still ended up QB 12, had 22.6 DraftKings points last week. He was less than a half a point behind Lamar Jackson, okay? Baker's even cheaper this week at 6,800. He's playing a Washington team that he lit up for 289 yards and 4 touchdowns in week 1 on his way to 29.7 DK points and a QB2 finish. McMillan's a little bit more expensive than last week at 5,200, but as a pair, they're still cheaper than last week, and that's still a great price for everybody. J-Mac was still wide receiver 14 last week in what felt like a down game for him. He scored again. The points you got back from both of them were great returns on what you spent for them, even though they weren't top 4, top 5 type plays. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were wide receiver 8 and 9 in week 1. So Evans can still eat, but I still like McMillan to keep it rolling for that nice price this week. Okay. And then we're going to make a playback here against them in that game at the tight end position. We're going to go with old man Zach Ertz. He's a little bit expensive this week at 4,300, but just like last week, I don't love a whole lot of the tight end matchups this week. And if you look at the trends here, each tight end's last 3 games, Zach Ertz over the last 3 games that tight ends have played is tight end 8 overall. But if you look at who's actually playing still this week, he's behind only Mark Andrews in those rankings. He's hotter than anybody at tight end position other than Mark Andrews in the last, like I said, over the last month or so. He's got 6 touchdowns in his past 7 games. He's seen more targets this year than any other tight end who's playing a game this week. And he's facing a Bucs defense that allows the 7th most points to the position. And oh yeah, they just let Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau go 10 for $111 against them. If Ertz hits his average score this week, he's a good play. If he gets in the end zone again in what looks to be a shootout and is the highest point total game of the week, by the way, at 50 points, he's a great play. So that's our 3, 3 of our big 4 positions there: Mayfield, McMillan, and Ertz. That puts us at $16,300. But I'm going to start mixing up a Rob Roy here. And while I do that, and while I mix it up, I'm going to need you guys to help me out at running back again. Okay. We saved money with this Baker Mayfield and McMillan pairing. So we're going to fork it over again for a running back or 2 this week. I want to hear each of you make a case for who you want to play this week, regardless of price tag, regardless of what anybody else says. Who are you guys looking at playing this week or think could be a great play in DFS this week? Dan, let's start with you while I mix up this Rob Roy.
Yeah. So I'm as far as, do you just want a running back? Because I have a running back and a wide receiver. Okay, I have a running back for you. I'm playing Bucky Irving no matter what. He took completely over the backfield in a must-win game against the Saints, in which they had to come back from behind from. Rashad White only played 27% of the snaps and didn't have a single touch in that game. So it almost looks like Bucky Irving's completely taken over as the bell cow. He's only $7,000. That is a player I want to make sure I have in my lineup for this week, especially for DFS.
All right, sounds good. We got Bucky Irving at $7K. Adam, who are you looking at playing at the running back position this week? Who you think's got a chance to return some value here for us?
I would say Josh Jacobs, certainly a good value. I think the matchup is really, obviously tough there, which kind of artificially lowers the price. But I think for the Packers to be effective, and we've seen them be showstoppers in the playoffs before, he's gonna have to be a big part of it, especially with Christian Watson out. It kind of feeds the volume a little bit his direction. So with the matchup kind of bringing his price down a little bit, I like going in that direction, especially there's not going to be a whole lot of other people on Josh Jacobs against the Eagles. So makes
Josh Jacobs. Yeah, well, that's a good point there, that I don't think he's going to be a real high play. He's the third highest priced running back on the slate this week at 7,700, even though, like you said, that price may have been pushed down a little bit because of the situation there. I don't know. I'm going to be dead honest with you. I don't want to touch anybody from Green Bay outside of possibly Tucker Kraft, and I really don't even want to have to touch him this week. And I like the Packers. You know that. I'll be cheering for him. But playing against the Philadelphia team there that has surrendered the fewest points to opposing fantasy running backs. And as you said, with Watson out, I'm not sure how much they're going to be leaning on Jacobs versus keying on Jacobs defensively and all that. I'm a little more skeptical of that one than I am the Bucky Irving play, but we know I'm in on the Buccaneers this week. Go ahead, Chris. Is there somebody you want to play this week at running back here before I make mine?
Yeah, I think, Chase, it's cold outside, and people don't like to tackle big people on the outside when it's cold. Derrick Henry, to me, is the guy that showed you that he can run on Pittsburgh. This isn't your dad's Pittsburgh run defense. This is a defense that you can definitely expose. And I think with Derrick Henry showing what he could do last week, I think this is a prime time game for him. We have Zay Flowers is probably out this week, so I think Derrick Henry is the guy that you can ride and feel confident in your lineup this week.
Bye.
All right, yeah, Derrick Henry. Hey, that's what I'm talking about when I said we're going to pay up. Derrick Henry, second highest price guy on the slate at 8,200. I'm actually going to do you one better. I am going for Saquon Barkley against my Green Bay Packers at 8,500, the most expensive player overall on the slate. But of all the guys that are over 8,000 this week, I think Saquon really has the best chance to return not just good, but great value on the dollars that you're spending on him. He put up over 130 total yards, 3 scores against Green Bay in week 1 on that horrible field in Brazil. He hasn't looked back since. He and the line, I think, should be rested after not doing anything at all last week. I think they're going to maybe want to pound him, protect Jalen Hurts. This team cannot make a deep run in the playoffs without Hurts under center. First game back from that concussion. I don't see why they need to put any undue stress on him, especially against a Packers team that hasn't looked great lately. I am willing to pay up all the way on Saquon Barkley and take him there. Don't be afraid to spend money at the running back position. There are some cheaper wide receiver plays. Dan said he had one he can maybe throw in the comments for you there. If you want to go cheap and deep, I've got Quentin Johnston at 4,800 and Cam Akers at 4,800, I think can help fill out your lineups for cheap. Dan, you want to talk about who you got there wide receiver quick?
Well, I had a pay up wide receiver. My cheap wide receiver is Jalen McMillan at $5,100. I'm just riding that hot streak. Maybe Marvin Mims in there too, but he's been a bit of a hot streak. But the receiver, if you're going to pay up for a receiver, the guy I want undoubtedly is Puka Nacua. This is a guy who has the highest target share of these number one wide receivers over the last few weeks, $7,600. So I want him badly against the Minnesota Vikings, that Monday night matchup. He's the guy. Undoubtedly, over even Justin Jefferson, who's been kind of sharing enough, like just enough with like Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, where he hasn't put up those gaudy Justin Jefferson numbers. Puka Nacua is a guy I really want wide receiver over everybody else. Tyler Bradley wanted to ask, how about James Cook? He's affordable. He's kind of affordable. It's not a bad matchup. The thing is, and I was going to talk about this later, and Chaz will talk to you about it later as well, that we got to watch out for snow in that game. Things could get real interesting in that matchup if we get the lake effect coming in. I'll talk about that in a little more detail afterwards. Go ahead, Chase.
Well, I was just going to say, no, I love your Puka Nacua play. I actually considered talking about him to start with, but like I said, we're going to play down there cost-wise with Mayfield and McMillan. So let's talk about this cocktail real quick before we move on out here. I made a Rob Roy. If anybody knows what a Manhattan is, you should know what a Manhattan is. It's a classic cocktail. It's one of the staples. Rob Roy is basically a Manhattan made with scotch rather than made with rye there. We're going with 1 ounce of a sweet vermouth, a red vermouth there. We're going to go with 2 ounces. And I went with 2 ounces of Highland Park 12 Viking Honor from Orkney. I love this stuff. It's probably my favorite overall single malt scotch. So 1 of sweet vermouth, 2 of the single malt scotch, and then 3 dashes of bitters, a 1, 2, 3. It's as quick, as easy as that. Garnish it with some cherries, and that's a Rob Roy. Good luck to everybody this weekend. And if you got any questions, let us know in the comments.
Well, it's time to cash some tickets. Chaz Filardi in the building from Sports Betting Weekly. What's going on, Chaz? We had a good week to kick off our little session here for the after season last week.
Yeah, cashing tickets is good. My audio better there or what?
Yeah. We were feeding through. We could hear ourselves through your mic, and it was a mess. So we're all good now.
So, you know what? For me, it's been a great run. But he mentioned Brazil, and I was laughing because the first game is the Charger game. Well, last year I was in Brazil for my son's wedding. So the games are on it. They start at like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And that was the game. That was the one, right? I think they fired the coach the next day, or I don't know if he made it home on the tarmac. Remember the Raiders beat him 63-21? Boy, have the Chargers come a long way since that night.
Yeah,
and you know how I feel about the Chargers.
Oh, I know. That's your background, buddy. Have you gotten used to actually calling them Los Angeles? You still call them San Diego?
Nah, the Chargers.
I
didn't call them San Diego Chargers.
The Washington team by the wrong name. Yeah.
Well, Chaz, it's good to have you on, man. We got the wild card playoffs to talk about to kick off the show. Maybe we'll get to a little college football at the very end. But on Saturday, we got the 2 games.
Oh, we're gonna when I tell you my parlay, we will cover that.
No, okay. I look forward to it. We got the 2 games on Saturday, right? So we have the Chargers and Houston Texans, and then we, of course, later on that day, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. By the way, just a quick side comment. I think it's really weird the way the NFL made it all AFC games and then all NFC games. Usually they kind of mix and match. It was a little odd to me. But anyway.
Did you see that? Did you see that stat about the Houston? That every time, like for the last 7 or 8 times Houston's been in the playoffs, they've got the 3:30 Saturday game.
No, well, I did actually see that. I saw something about not that stat, but like the fact that they're never in the prime time slot, even when they're in the playoffs ever.
It's been the Saturday 3:30 game, like something like this last 7 times they've been or something. It's ridiculous. Like, you're welcome, Houston. Glad you're here.
Yeah, nobody cares about you outside of Houston. That's what that tells me pretty much. Just to give you the lines here, Chargers right now 2.5. That line's been moving a little bit. It was at 3 at one point. It was 2.5. I actually myself locked it in at 2.5 earlier in the week because I love the 2.5 for the Chargers in this one. An over under of 42.5. And just to give you a little broad general. I know Chaz doesn't like to bet the big lines, but just to give you guys an idea, the Chargers are 12-4-1 against the spread this year, and Houston Texans 7-9-1. Very happy to get that 2.5 for the Chargers. I do think they win this game heading into this one. Now, having said that, Chaz likes to get into minutia of it. So, do you got anything in that matchup here to kick off the wild card playoffs?
As you know, when there's only 2 college games and 6 pro games, boy, you could devote a lot of time to this crap. Doesn't even impact your marriage, man. So here's what I got. The Chargers have allowed 19 or less since that game. Since that game, that's how they played defense. And he's a good coach. I mean, it's hard to argue that. In their last 5, in the second half on the road, this goes back to October, they've allowed 39 total points. So remember, math is easy if you round up. So that's like 40 divided by 5. That's 8. So 8.5. 8. That's not a lot of points to give up. Their defense has the highest yards per point of all 12. So what it is how hard is it to get a point? You got to go 18 yards to get a point off of this. A lot of teams, it's 12 yards, 13 yards. They have the number 1 defense that way, and they got the top interceptions. You only got 3 interceptions. Lamar Jackson has 33% more interceptions than that. So those are the stats that jumped out at me. Houston's under 1-7. So 7 of their last 8 games have gone under. But what's going on with their halftime pep talk? So this is the last 9 home games. This is at home, right? So the locker room. You'd be there every day. They've scored 45 points. That goes back to last season, too. 9 home games. You guys, you know what I have keep these stressed. I got the you were mentioning Houston in the playoffs. I got data going back to Houston in 2013. So we've been doing this a long time. And I'm going to ask a few questions about that old data. But 45 points in 9 home games after halftime. That's, again, 5. That's 5. That's less than 8. 5 is less than 8. They're 21.94 and 29, or 21.94 and 21.9 against it. Anybody notice that? Same exact line. They score and they give up. That's after all the games they played. They played 17 games. They landed exactly on that number. I think that's pretty well, but I like the Chargers as well.
Look at that. Hopping on the Chargers bandwagon. I have 3 props, and I want to get Adam's take on these 3 props for this game. So just like Chaz said, by the way, I was able to spend more time than I usually get to do with this, especially for a Wednesday night show. So the first one I have, I don't typically do this. And Chaz has mentioned this before. You like to make your bets where you can get them, early in the game, first quarter, second quarter, you hit your bet, you can go do whatever you want afterwards. And that's how I feel about player props usually. That's why I look for overs on player props. But Nico Collins stuck out to me as an under on this one at 87.5 receiving yards. Kind of the, match what Chaz is saying there. Houston's offense has been a mess down the stretch, and Collins been under this mark 4 games in a row. And on top of that, you have the Chargers have only allowed 2 wide receivers over the past 4 weeks to even get over the 87.5 receiving mark. And that was Mike Evans and Jacoby Myers. So under 87.5 yards for Nico Collins. I have over 59.5 yards and over 15.5 carries for J.K. Dobbins. It wasn't great, his return. I don't know how explosive he's going to be. He only had 3.5 yards per carry average last week in his return back from that knee injury, but they gave him 18 carries. That workload is going to be there, which should lead to him being able to get over that 60 yards and over those 15.5 carries. And the Texans have allowed a rusher over that mark the last 2 weeks in a row. So Dobbins betting on the volume there. And then Ladd McConkey, I have him over 69.5 receiving yards. He's been over that 6 of the last 7, been real consistent down the stretch. Texans allowing the 12th most receiving yards to wide receivers, but they haven't allowed a pass catcher to go over that mark in the last 4 games as they've gotten healthier in the secondary. So it's a little bit interesting there, but at the same time, in those last 4 games, they haven't faced a wide receiver one who's getting 25% of the target share or more for his team. So, Adam, what do you think about those props, man?
I genuinely like all of them. Start with McConkey. He's someone who, I mean, I was telling one of my friends the other day that I know he's gotten expensive in Dynasty. I'm still a buyer. I think there's more to go. I think that he can genuinely enter that top flight tier of receivers in the NFL, especially with the quarterback that he's got there. And this is a game that I think he can do really well. The matchup is good. And I'm with you seemingly being much higher on the Chargers. Dobbins, I'm with you. I think it's a volume thing. I think it's because of game script. I'm concerned about Dobbins himself, and this is probably the play, especially the yards portion of it, that I would be the most concerned about. But the other backs just aren't. You could cut Dobbins' leg off, and the other backs just aren't on his level on this roster. It's really just a depth problem for them. So I think the volume at least is there. And Nico, he's always capable of breaking that. But if you're playing the odds, to me, I think the under is the right call.
All right, so Adam's on my side. Here's another game Saturday night. We got the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Baltimore Ravens. Both teams 11-6 against the spread. But Chris, the Ravens are favored by 9.5 points. The Vegas is telling you they expect this to be a no contest situation. I know the last game the Ravens handled business, but the Steelers have a good record against the Baltimore Ravens throughout their history. What's your take on a line like that? Do you think it's actually fair the Ravens will just take care of business here?
I do think they're going to take care of business. I mean, look, I know Pittsburgh has historically given the Ravens a hard time, but this year they have not. And I think when you look at the Steelers are doing right now, they're not scoring points. I mean, Chaz will get to some of this stuff in the numbers, but I look at a Ravens team that's hitting strides on defense and offense versus Steelers defense that's trying to figure out what it can do offensively, and the defense is hemorrhaging. I like the Ravens big in this game.
I mean, it's definitely a hot, cold situation, but let's not forget, I mean, the Steelers did beat them back in week 13 earlier this season, so it wasn't that long ago. However, it is a hot and cold going into the season. But Chaz, do you have anything going on in this game?
Well, yeah, we were sitting in a train station, the lobby. My wife was going up to LA, so I was hanging out until the train came, watching that 18-16 game where they lost the game to a team they didn't give up a touchdown against. And they've only played once. You know, again, we got the data going back. So I peeked. I peeked at the data. This is going back to playoffs, right? Playoffs. 2013, Pittsburgh, Baltimore. It was 30-17. The only time they played in the playoffs since we've been keeping data. So I agree that they play each other close regular season. That conference, that division is a bitch to bet. It really is. It's a 3-point. If the thing's more than 3, if the line's more than 3, I stay away from those games. But I like Chris's opinion on Baltimore. But I'm going to do the same thing I did last week. I bet him early. That guy had a pick 6. I won a lot of money. I just danced in my kitchen a little. Life was good. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to bet him early. Quarter one, it'll be probably say I do a half unit quarter one. It'll be a unit and a half first half. And I'll put it like a quarter or a half a unit on the game because I can always come back if they're losing. If I lose those first 2 and I like Baltimore, then I'm going to get them, right? I could get a money line. I could get them, maybe getting points if something weird happens. I don't see something weird happening. And I also like their team total over. So It's if you're out and about and you're not watching the game, and at halftime you see you scored, it's really high for Baltimore. I'm dancing again.
So Baltimore early, I like that concept. All right, Chase, you're gonna help me out with the player props. I got four in this game, and I don't usually get 4 in one game, but we got 4 in this one. So Russell Wilson over 200.5 passing yards. He's at 217 the last time out against the Ravens when the Steelers absolutely sucked and only put up like 17 points or whatever it was. I know the Ravens, and I want to point this out. Yes, the Ravens on paper, when you go to look at it, gave up the second most passing yards to the quarterback. I do want to put that in the context that as of late, they've been really, really good. But I will say this, they haven't really faced many quality quarterbacks over the second half of the season either.
Still aren't.
And I do, it's 200.5. So, and what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. And I expect the Steelers to be in a negative game script here. So 200.5, I have that over for Russell Wilson. I don't think we're asking for a lot in that one. I did not think I'd be betting over on Russell Wilson. Trust me. Derrick Henry's another one I have over 99.5 rushing yards. Just goes back to Chris's point earlier when we're talking DFS about him having a good game. He's been well over this mark the last 3 games in a row. By the way, he had 162 yards against the Steelers 3 freaking weeks ago as it is. And this is the time of year where, again, to Chris's point earlier, Derrick Henry just shines. George Pickens, I have him over 52.5 receiving yards. You're getting a little bit of a discount right now because Pickens is coming off back-to-back bad weeks after his injury return. But it's still clear he's the number one receiver. The Ravens have allowed at least one pass catcher to go over this mark each of the last 4 games. I think there's a decent chance George Pickens goes over 52.5. And then Lamar Jackson, I have him under 218.5 passing yards. He's been under this mark 3 of the last 4, partly because Derrick Henry's been so dominant, which plays into what I've been talking about earlier. And the Steelers have allowed a passer to go over this mark 3 of the last 4 games, but that one under was against Lamar Jackson 3 weeks ago when the Ravens handled business because they just went into a pro game script. So Chase, what's your take on those props there?
Well, I really like the Derrick Henry one. I'm big on him. I think they're going to run him, pound him, and then try and assert their will against their rivals here, the Steelers. I'm okay with the Russell Wilson bet. And then that being said, it's really hard to see him going over 200 yards and seeing George Pickens not play a big part in that. I think a big part of Russ only having 148 last week was that he couldn't connect with George Pickens. Remember, Pickens had that 0-yard catch on the opening drive of the game, and then they couldn't hit him 5 more times the rest of the game they tried. So if you're going to bet that over on Russell Wilson, yeah, I think I can take George Pickens over 52.5. I don't feel great about either one of those, though. Not like I do the Derrick Henry one. The Lamar Jackson under, you got to keep in mind, too, Zay Flowers still wasn't in practice really today, and you're not sure if he doesn't have his top receiver. Now, Rashad Bateman, I think, has had a real good year compared to previous years. I think he has shown that he actually is an NFL wide receiver. I don't necessarily know that he's ready to be a number 1 in the absence of Zay Flowers yet. So yeah, I'm good with that Lamar Jackson under mark as well there. Plus I don't think that with Henry rolling like I expect him to roll, I don't think they're going to have to throw against the Steelers. So I feel real good about your Ravens picks. I'm okay taking a shot on those Steelers picks, but like Pickens has been a head case lately too. I don't know. I'm off of his bandwagon completely. But if you're going to get 200 yards out of Russ, you're going to have to get a quarter of that from George Pickens, I think so.
Yeah, and that's why you bet the line if you see it that way, and it kind of plays into each other. Chaz talks about complimenting your bets all the time. Sunday wraps up the AFC. We got the Denver Broncos taking on the Buffalo Bills. The Broncos been 11-5-1 against the spread. The Bills have been 10-7 against the spread. This is a 8.5-point line in favor of Buffalo in Buffalo. Now, again, this game, and Chaz, I'm going to go right to you on this one because this game is a little trickier for me. Now, there's not a big percentage that it will snow, but we know how Buffalo is. That lake effect can kick in at any given time, and then all of a sudden we have a blizzard on our hands. And when that happens, it's hard to feel confident about any one bet. So I would say this to people: look, any bet we give you tonight, make sure you're checking that weather through Sunday morning. I'm just going to give it the caveat right off the rip. So when you have a situation like that, how do you approach it?
You know what? sometimes you just, if you bet early enough, you're screwed because, stars do come. Mother Nature doesn't care who I got my money on. You know what I mean? But do you remember? I was eating sushi. So I remember I was eating sushi. He threw for a pass, touchdown, caught a touchdown, and ran a touchdown in the snow. All right. I'm not worried about the snow with this guy. But here's the thing. There's a couple things. On the road in the first quarter, Denver's allowed 0 points in 6 of 8. They're 8-1 against the spread in their last 9 on the road in the first quarter. For the second half, they're 7-1 against the spread overall. They've scored 14 points in 6 of their last 7. For the game, they've scored 24 plus in 7 of 7. I don't know if you remember, I was all over them last week with their team total. That was nice because when you win the first half team total, like at the first quarter, life's pretty good. But they are number 2 in defense behind the Chargers. Remember I talked about the yards per point? You got to go 17 yards on Denver to get a point. The problem is Buffalo can go 17 yards on a play. So they could technically get a point if they want. In their 8 of their last 9 in Buffalo have gone over. In the second half on the home, they scored 13 plus in 8 of 8. They were 7-1 against the spread during that. At the home for the game, they've scored 30 plus in 10 of 11, over in 8 of 9. And they score 1 point for every 11 yards that they go down the field. That's number 2 in the offense of the teams that are left. But it is a lot of points. I like Denver. Denver's won me a lot of money this year. The kid, what did he set another rookie record, right? He did something with that last game that some rookies never done. When you see, with all the quarterbacks, you got somebody doing something like Lamar just did something, right? Nobody had ever done before. Was it right? 4,009 or something like that. Yeah. So when you got guys doing stuff never been done before, and there's a lot of Super Bowl 59. So yeah, I like Denver, but I'm going with Buffalo team total over. I'll root for everybody. I just it's too many points. Too many points.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it too. Chris, do you agree with that?
I do think it's too many points because I think Buffalo's going to score most of those points. I don't think Denver's going to show up in this game, Dan. I think this is going to be blowout city, and I love Buffalo big in this game. So I do think the point's a little high. I think this Denver offense is really going to struggle with the Buffalo defense. That they love the short passing attack. They welcome it, and a lot of things that Denver does well, the things that Buffalo wants you to do defensively. I think this is going to be a hard matchup for Denver. And as Chaz talked about, Josh Allen always plays well, especially in the elements. The weapons they have at their disposal, Denver is going to be in a reawakening, I think.
Yeah, 46.5. And again, it might snow. I'm just saying, bet the under there. But anyway, I do have some props for this game. Now, again, I gave the caveat. If the weather goes, throw these props out the freaking window. And I only have 2 of them anyway. But Adam, you can help me out here. If it doesn't snow, Adam. Bo Nix over 219.5 passing yards. He's been over that 5 of the last 7. And the Bills have actually allowed the 10th most passing yards this season. They've allowed a passer over that mark 3 of the last 4 games. The caveat, again, like I said, keep an eye on the weather. So Bo Nix over 219.5 passing yards. The other one is James Cook. I have him over 55.5 rushing yards. He's been over at 3 of the last 5. And the Broncos, a little bit of a cold streak against rushers right now. They've allowed a rusher to reach over that mark 3 of the last 4 versus their opponents playing their starters, right? I kind of threw away the Kansas City game because they didn't play their starters. They didn't play for anything. So that's not really a data point for me. So they have allowed quite a few rushers get over that mark at least. And he's been getting about 14 to 15 carries. When he gets 14 to 15 carries, he goes over that mark every single week. He's had some weeks here where he has 9, 10, 11. So he needs to get that 14 to 15. I do believe he gets that in this game. So what do anybody think about that? James Cook over 55.5 rushing yards and Bo Nix over 219.5 passing yards.
Yeah, I think those are pretty decent lines. Nix is scary. Just look, rookie in his first playoff game is tough. But just based on what I expect game script wise, and that is a good number. You talk about that at like 230, 240, I would get a little antsy. 219 is a pretty safe number, where, maybe you don't want to hammer it to your point, right today. But as the weather gets a little bit clearer, if you feel like a good chance it's not going to snow, I like that. And the James Cook one feels to me like a no-brainer. I'm definitely with you on that one, kind of regardless of the weather on that one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that is the same one, actually.
With you.
Yeah. All right, cool. So finally we can talk about some NFC teams. Green Bay Packers chasing the building here, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. The Packers just above 500 against the spread at 9-8. The Eagles have been 11-6 against the spread themselves. And we're going in with a line. It's a very interesting line, in my opinion, because it's only a 4.5 point spread between the Eagles and the Packers with a 45.5 over under. I'm sorry, Chase, but I am surprised that line's not higher in favor of Philadelphia.
I'm not arguing with you. Like I said, I don't really want to touch anybody on Green Bay's offense this week outside of possibly Tucker Kraft if you need him. But other than that, I really don't want to have to deal with this game at all. I think that the Eagles, especially the way they've been playing lately, are clearly the better team. I think this is not the same matchup we saw in week 1 when the Packers actually made it close. 4.5 at home kind of shocked me too.
I mean, I think, and this is a game I would bet on early in favor of Philadelphia, and we'll see what Chaz thinks here. But I think part of this was the uncertainty because when we came out early in the week, Jalen Hurts was still in concussion protocol, but he practiced today and he practiced in full. So our expectation is that Jalen Hurts will clear concussion protocol and be good to go. So I think you're getting
there's questions on Green Bay's side too now about Love and that elbow and how he's doing. I mean, he was limited too. So I mean, 4.5 is kind of a crazy crap shoot there to me.
So we kick it to Chaz. What do you got in this game knowing all that information?
Oh, what do we always say? That when a line is crazy, talk to me on Monday and it'll make sense again. That's kind of how it works. They're really good at what they do. That's why they got all those fancy lights on the buildings, right? So Green Bay scored 20 plus in their last 8 games, 20 or more. The road games, they scored 22 plus in 11 of 12 going back to last season. On the road in the second half, they scored 13 plus in 5 of 6. They scored 20 points pretty much every game. In the first quarter, Philly scored 7 or more in 4 straight. The first half, they're 10-2 against the spread overall. For the game overall, they're scoring 20 plus in 13 of 13. At home, they scored 20 plus in 16 of 17. And the home game, though, they allow 18 or less in 5 of 5. They've got the number 1 defense in terms of passing yards, right? And only Baltimore has more running yards than them. So their defense allows less. Their number 1 defense against the pass, and their rushing game is second only to Baltimore. So I like Philly, but I do have a circle with the money line. I just the 4.5 should be 7. I think it should be 7. You know, I'm not a lines maker, but I'm gonna not be afraid to do money lines. We're gonna talk about when we talk about the couch. People that are afraid to do money lines just aren't getting the fact that the point spreads are Satan, man. They're Satan.
More money in your pocket's better than less. Yeah, Chaz, I'm with you. And stop trying to always hit the jackpot. Chris, help me out with the player props, man. I got 3, all right? So I got Saquon Barkley, over 101 rushing yards, and over 20.5 carries. Okay, so I got a little same game parlay going on there with Saquon. I think one goes hand in hand with the other if he actually does hit the over. He's been over that 6 of the last 7. And potentially on paper, it's a tougher matchup because the Packers haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher since week 7 which was Joe Mixon. And they have the 8th least amount of rushing yards allowed to the running backs this season. But many of their games, especially since week 7, have not had a premium rusher going against them in their opponent. So they have a weaker competition that kind of hinders that a bit. And Saquon, I know he didn't play last week, but the 2 weeks before that, 28 and 29 carries. Jalen Hurts banged up or not, first playoff game, I think it's going to be hard for me to imagine Saquon not getting 25 plus carries in this game. So that's the first one. Then we have A.J. Brown. Vice versa. I have him under 87.5 receiving yards. Okay. So he's been under that 3 of the last 5. Packers have only allowed 1 wide receiver since their bye week in week 10 to reach over 87.5 receiving yards. Actually, they've been pretty good in the back end on the secondary. Eagles playing, if they play their game, which I do think they will, they'll have the opportunity to do so. It's defense, a heavy dose of the running game. So I think it's going to limit the volume like it has been in the passing game for the Eagles all year. And A.J. Brown becomes kind of a scary pick there at 87.5 receiving yards. So I have the under there. there. And then Josh Jacobs, I have the under on 69.5 rushing yards. He's been under that 5 of the last 6. I mean, the Eagles have only allowed the 8th least rushing yards running backs this season. They've been even better since week 5. And he finished out the year with just a 3.8 yards per carry over his last few games with no explosive runs whatsoever. He's going to I calculate he probably will need at least 20 plus carries to reach this number. And that's something he hasn't done at all. Or I'm sorry, he's only done once over the last 6 games. So I have Josh Jacobs under 69.5 rushing yards. So what do you think about those props?
They're a little bit tough for me. Some of them I definitely like. You said Saquon, it was 21 carries, it wasn't 25. I just want to clarify.
No, it's 20.5 carries.
20
Yeah.
So I do like the touches for there. I do have a little concern that Jalen Hurts is going to be kind of involved. You haven't seen Kenneth Gainwell be sprinkled in here or there. But I agree with you, Dan. This should be a Saquon Barkley game. This is a game that they can continue to give him the carries. And I think you're going to see at least 21 to 25 carries. So I do like that one. The A.J. Brown one, I think it's one I'm not necessarily strong on. Look, when Jalen Hurts is banged up, the guy he looks for is A.J. Brown. That's his number one read. That's the receiving passing attack. When they're kind of rusty, that's what they look for. And I know that the passing game has been a little more limited, but we did see the last 2 quarterbacks expanded a little bit more, and they have kind of get the other guys involved. A.J. Brown is still a guy that I think can command a lot of attention. No Jerod Alexander for Green Bay. I know that they've been pretty good defensively, but there's a lot more mouths to kind of stop for this team. So A.J. Brown ones I'll struggle with. The Josh Jacobs ones I do like. I have a little concern because Josh Jacobs can break one on. The Eagles are pretty good overall, but they do give up some gash runs here or there. Having said that, the explosiveness hasn't been there for Josh Jacobs, and the offense in general for Green Bay hasn't kind of flown the same way. So I do like that one.
Okay, so you want 2 out of 3. I'll take it. I'll take the 2 out of 3, and I'm just
getting back to basing the same game parlay. The bottom line is when you're dealing with a running back like Barkley and Henry, right? Those are the 2 studs that are in these games. If they take over the game, you're not going to be throwing the ball. You don't have to. If you can't stop me and I'm getting 7 yards every time I hand off the ball, why would I even throw it?
Yeah, that's kind of what the MO the Eagles have followed, and the Ravens for that matter, which is reflected in the player prop data I'm giving you guys. And I'm just going to say I'm sorry in advance for Chase, because you're going to have to. I have a bad feeling you're going to have to suffer through that one. Maybe a little surprise, but I have a bad feeling you're going to have to suffer through that one on Sunday. Sorry, buddy. All right, so we got the other game going on Sunday night. This is Washington and Tampa Bay. This is the most interesting one for me as far as like it kind of shows a little bit in the spread line too. Is it kind of being close to being a pick'em, and it's a 3-point spread in favor of Tampa Bay. But this is one of those ones that I don't know if I have a great feel that could go either way for these 2 teams. The over-under, by the way, 50.5. It's the highest. Let me double check to make sure the Minnesota game didn't change. Yeah, so it's the highest over-under of the weekend for Wildcard playoff week here. Both Tampa Bay and Washington been 10-7 against the spread. So you're kind of going even in this one. I want to kick it to Chaz first. Is there anything glaring to you in this game?
Well, I'm just going to read it all and let you know that I don't have a play in this game on a side. So 0 points last week versus Dallas, but before that, Washington scored in 9 of 10. They scored 6 or more. In the second half, overall, their overs are 13-0-2. They've scored 20-plus in 3 of the last 3 second halves. At home, their overs 11-0-1. They've allowed 13-plus in 5 of 5. So some of the overs is because they're scoring, some of it is because they're allowing. Tampa Bay in the second half overall, 8-1-1 against the spread. They've allowed 6 points in their last 5 games. They've allowed 6 points. That's math is basic. That's like 1. They scored 14-plus in 4 of their last 4. I'm going to sit around on this game and wait for the second half. Now, I got a couple back-to-back second half plays on these games. And the reason I like doing second halves is because sometimes the game just lines up for you. But I'm betting second half over, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it to the Monday night game. And when I do the Monday night game, I'm going to tie that to something else.
All right. Well, I like that. Chris, I saw you do 2 thumbs up. Are you saying take the over in this game?
Take the over in this game. I love the over. I think this is going to be a real high scoring. You got 2 teams that have high pace. A lot of plays are going to be going on both sides. A lot of explosiveness, and both defenses are kind of facing things that are their Achilles heel in a sense. Tampa Bay has been terrible versus mobile quarterbacks historically, even when they're great run defensively. And then they have they'll have to take a receiver one away this entire season. So Terry McLaurin should be in plays as well. We talked about Zach Ertz earlier, and then Tampa Bay on the other side. Washington's defense is Swiss cheese basically out there as well. So I like both the overs in this game.
Yeah,
hey, you mentioned somebody mentioned week one. Well, this also, right? Both of these teams that the only two games where teams are matching up again, they both matched up week one. Yep. And you couldn't be more different than a team week one than you are the first round of the playoffs, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, this wild card weekend is going to end on, I think, on two of the highest scoring games of the weekend. So Tampa Bay, Washington. Chris, I'm with you. I love the over idea there. Adam, help me out with the props. Bucky Irving, I got over 89.5 rushing yards. Should come as no surprise if you were listening to the DFS segment when I threw Bucky Irving's name out there at $7,000. But he has, again, I'm just going to outlay it for you in case you just joined the show. He has completely taken over the backfield. White played 36% of the snaps in week 17 and just 27% of the snaps in week 18 with 0 touches in week 18. And remember, that wasn't a throwaway game. They had to win that game, and they were actually down at one point against the Saints. Irving completely took over. So I like him over. Of course, the Commanders have been bad against running backs, right? They've allowed the third most rushing yards to running backs. So Bucky Irving over 89.5 rushing yards. Then I already know Chris agrees with this because he mentioned them. Terry McLaurin over 58.5 receiving yards. I was shocked it was that low. I was shocked. You're getting a discount right now because he didn't perform the previous week. 58.5 receiving yards against the Tampa Bay Bucks. Allows the 7th most receiving yards to wide receivers. It's ridiculous. And on top of it, they have for Terry McLaurin, he's been over that 5 of the last 6. So what do you think about those two props in this one?
Well, I mean, we kind of come full circle here because if you remember in the Dynasty segment when I talked about being confident in Bucky Irving, my reasoning was they have holes elsewhere, and I specifically mentioned this defense and specifically this secondary for Tampa Bay. So I'm with you on Terry McLaurin because I do not think highly of this Tampa Bay secondary, and I do agree with you on the over. And then as far as Bucky Irving, same point. I'm with you. And good player. I mean, the only thing that Rachaad White has over him maybe is pass pro. At this point, everything else favors Bucky Irving. So if you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against a team that, I mean, their pass rush is fine, but it's nothing that you're especially afraid of, then yeah, you're going to ride Bucky Irving, I would think. So I'm with you. I think the Bucky Irving show continues. So, I mean, I think you've picked some good props tonight, Dan.
All right, you guys are making me feel real confident right now. Let's see if we can end it on a strong note. We got the Monday night game. Minnesota Vikings against the Los Angeles Rams. Vikings have been 10-6-1 against the spread, and Rams have been 9-8. The spread is super close. So the Vikings are on the road, even though they had the better record because they didn't win the division. They're favored at 1.5 points in Los Angeles. The over-under on this game is at 47.5. And people are actually juicing the Rams because this line opened up at 2.5. And now it's at 1.5. People are juicing the Rams because everyone watched the game against Detroit and we're like, all of a sudden the Vikings are a crappy football team, apparently because of that one game. It's the only reasoning that we can possibly come up with, essentially. So, Chaz, I want to go to you first about anything sticking out to you in this game. I know there's got to be something there because you want to parlay up with it later.
Yeah, in the second half, Minnesota's allowed 10 plus and 7-7. On the road, they've scored 14 plus and 6-6. In the second half on the road, they've allowed 11 plus in 4 of 4. And on the second half on the road, they're over 6 straight. On the road, they're 4-1 against the spread. Their game, they've scored 21 plus and 9-9 or 7-2 against the spread. The Rams are weird. The Rams don't have any kind of consistency with the data at all. They're 0-4 in the first quarter against the spread overall and 5-1 against the spread all. I'm doing the same thing at this other game. Sitting around watching this game, maybe do some live action, but I'm waiting for halftime. I'm going to take this game, and then I'm going to parlay it to next week's division game because it's the last game, right? By the time this game goes to halftime, I'll have lines for those other games because the other games will all be finished. So I don't know who it is, but I'm going to have action if the second half goes over. Now, if you got a good book, you can go second half over in the fifth game, the second half over in with an open parlay.
Yeah.
But where I have my money doesn't have open parlays. I don't normally. I did it once this year. I purposely made a deposit in the book that lets me do that. I really felt good about these 3 second half. So I did a round robin, and you got to do it manually. It'd be like if you wanted to do a robin on one of the three plays for your fantasy guys, you'd have to do, the over with this, the over with that, and then do 2 and then do the 3 or whatever the case may be. And the first one lost, the second one lost, and the third one hit, but by then all the bets are lost. So I'm pretty good with second half over. Sometimes though you don't catch your break.
Well, that's why you're second half Chaz. Call me crazy. I'm taking Minnesota. I've already bet this game. I'm taking Minnesota with the -1.5. They're the better team. The Rams are pesky. The Rams have been there before. I'm not trying to take anything away from what the Rams could do. Would it shock me if they won this game? No. The Vikings are the better team, and I am not going to sit here and overreact to what happened against Detroit a week ago.
What about?
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, what about the matchup versus Rams a couple of weeks ago? Because the Rams kicked the shit out of them a couple of weeks ago, Dan. Like that's where I'm kind of torn. The Rams haven't showed up the last month or so, but that Vikings game, they did show up. Everybody showed up. And that's where the last time we've seen that offense kind of function and defense, showed out as well. So I was really interested in what Chaz had to say because I have no feel for this game. I agree with you. The Vikings should be the more talented team, but I expected that the Rams to
you're making it sound like they just played. Chris, right? You made it sound like they just played. That was a year ago, pretty much. It was October. And I really and some of the questions I have when we're done going over this game are relevant to I really appreciate your guys' knowledge and your value, but at some point I don't really care about games that happen. Definitely not that week one, those two matchups from week one. I mean, that means nothing to me.
Yeah, I mean they played back in October 24th in that one that Chaz is referencing to and Chris is referencing to as well. I mean it wasn't a lopsided affair. The Rams won that game, but they won 30-20. Here's the caveat.
I'll take those points. I'll take the same exact points this week.
It's true. Chris, to your point, the one thing a caveat I'll give you is that Sam Darnold turns to a pumpkin like he did in that game and like he did against Detroit, then yeah, everything goes out the window as far as Minnesota being the better team. I do believe Minnesota is still the better team here. And when I see the public is juicing on the Rams because they're overreacting to what happened to Minnesota last week, I do think Minnesota is a much better, or I shouldn't say much better. I think they're a well-coached team that will know how to bounce back and play to that. So I don't know. I like the Vikings a lot. I know most people do not agree with me here at the point. But Chase, I want to get you involved here. So I only have one player prop in this game. And maybe this goes to Chris's point or how close the line is because there was a lot of lines I felt were pretty good and not valuable. But this one I was on. So Puka Nacua, over 89.5 receiving yards. He's been over that 6 of the last 8 games. The Vikings have been terrible against wide receivers all season long. He's had a 34% target share since he returned from his injury. And Cooper Kupp's been 24%. So if there's one guy who I know is going to get the ball in this game over and over and over and over again, it's going to be Puka Nacua in this game. So I have him over 89.5 yards. What do you think about that?
I love it. Listen, my original write-up for tonight's DFS cocktail was going with Darnold and Addison playing back against Puka Nacua because I agree with you. I think Minnesota's a 14-3 team. They'd have been a 1 seed in literally any other year going back for just about time immemorial. Like, what are we doing talking about them like they're nothing? They're a 14-3 team. Last week, Sam Darnold didn't look great. But if you take a look at things, they went into Dan Campbell's house and tried to out Dan Campbell, going for it on 2 4th and goals, not from short, from 3 and 5 yards, trying to out Dan Campbell. If they take the points there, that game is a much different game, and they may be calling things a lot differently for Sam Darnold and going down the stretch. I don't blame that game on Sam Darnold at all. I think they outthought themselves and tried to go into Detroit and out Detroit. But either way, I think that this game is a lot more competitive than I think the public is giving it credit for. And I think that for the Rams to keep pace, they're going to have to pound the living hell out of Puka Nacua. I think he sees double-digit targets in this game, almost getting off the bus. I don't think that's even a question. And I think they're going to really have to hammer home on him. Minnesota is not good against receivers. They're not good against outside receivers. They're not good against the pass. I love that prop bet there. I would hammer that all day long.
All right. Well, I didn't get much pushback on my player props. I'm really happy about that going in this weekend. All right. So I promised Chaz.
Well, I'm going to have action. Since there's so few games, my bankroll goes a lot farther. I'm going to have action. And I wrote down every single one of them.
Boy.
No pressure. No pressure.
Hopefully they hit the way your plays hit. But Chaz, I promised you that we would talk a little semi-college football here before we got out of here. So what do you got in this one?
Two quick questions. You guys, honestly, how much you threw out last week and how much does last year or the last couple of years of playoff matter because of the roster turnover and stuff?
To me, it matters zero, but I'm also more of a players type of guy. You have a different roster, different teams, half the time, different coaches. What they do historically against each other is not something I typically look at.
I look at the coaches. I will pay attention to that. Like, I think there's certain guys who choke in big games, certain guys who don't.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hopefully we answered your question there.
No, I mean, it really is to me. And again, if you look at the data that I have, you just see some of these teams, it's been forever that they've been in there, or they like Houston was there last year, but the Houston team from last year and this Houston team is two different teams.
Yes.
Yeah, completely. Absolutely. They had more juice going into last year. This year is just, you were the best of the worst as far as the AFC South division goes.
I heard a lot of like comparisons with the Packers from last year, how they came in and they blew away the Cowboys and why can't they shock the world this year? I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. Dallas was not necessarily shooting the lights out at the end of last season, and Philadelphia has been playing gangbusters, and vice versa. The Packers were actually hot last year. Jordan Love himself was hot last year at the end of the season. This year, he's been better over the second half than he was over the first half, but he is not last year's second half Jordan Love right now. Plus, he's hurt. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lot more year to year. You've got to look at the situation. You got to look at what's going on. CJ Stroud 2024/2025 is not CJ Stroud of 2023. There's a lot of differences between teams this year and last year. You've got to take the current into account, because past is the past. That's why we're past it.
I was going to say, I agree with you, Chase, but nobody picked either of those teams last year either. And they had different reasons not to pick them, but they still didn't pick either one of those teams to win last year's in the first round. They both did.
But I'm saying you wouldn't have had to pick them last year, but the Packers pulled off the win last year, and I'm hearing a lot of comparisons this year, like, oh well, why couldn't they do it this year? They're still not getting picked to, but I've heard talk like, why couldn't they? The situation last year is so much different than the situation this year that, like, yeah, it's not going to play out. I don't see it playing out that same way. And I know I realize, yeah, well, if we could all see the future, we'd all be winning our bets left and right. But every single season is an entity unto itself, because the past is the past.
Oh, yeah, I will swear right now on a stack of Bibles, that when I do ever find myself stumbling across the future book from the Back to the Future movies, I will share it with you four.
My man. All right, Chaz, so what do you want to talk about the college football playoff, man?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a weird year, but I mean, these are like blue bullets, right? These are blue bullets. Do you guys have any opinions on these games?
Well, I can tell you right now, Notre Dame, Penn State, I'm taking the under. Because I only expect to be like 10 points scored in that entire freaking game. So I'm taking the under in that game, undoubtedly. I just had the line in front of me. The Texas-Ohio State game is not as big of a line as I was anticipating. So it's 5.5 in favor of Ohio State. With the way Texas is playing right now and their incompetency and sticking with Quinn Ewers for absolutely no reason. Steve Sarkisian is somebody I will bash any single day of the week as a coach. I'm taking Ohio State minus 5.5 points in that one too. So that's where I've landed on those two games.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any way that the favorites lose. So I'm going with a 5-team round robin, money line round robin. Then I'll put a little extra juice on the top, but I'm going with Notre Dame, Ohio State, the Chargers, Baltimore, and Buffalo. And then I'll wake up, take some of my money out and worry about Sunday.
All right. I like those
Don't
plays,
even
man.
worry about the later games. The later games on Sunday. Yeah.
Of course. So we'll be back next week at 9:30, just like we were. There's divisional round. We'll have the same amount of games to go through next week too, fellas. That's the exciting thing about that. But Chaz, thanks so much for coming on. What do you want people to check out for the weekend with you?
Well, remember, it's the AFC NFC Betterway weekend when we go to Vegas every year is coming up. You get 2 games. The flights are cheaper. There's no peoples there. Well, there's people, but not like Super Bowl. And the rooms are cheaper. You can get on a table. The tables aren't $78 minimums, you know. I love when you walk by, it's a $100 minimum table. Well, you know what? No, I'm sorry. I'm not sitting down with a stack of black chips to play against, you know, some dealer. That's not happening. But so that is really my focus. And I sell footballs for a living. So I got Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State, and Texas. I don't think I'm that good, but the Lord's treating me nice.
Hey, Adam, before we get out of here, we actually had one quick question. Chandler came in, trade the 1-2, Love and Jaden Reed, I'm assuming, for Hurts, AJ Brown. I'm going to guess Devonta Smith, trade for all the freaking Eagles. Packers for Eagles plus 1-2 and for 210 and a 6-point passing touchdown super flex league.
I think that's Jackson Smith and Jigga. I'm not sure if he messed it up or something, but I thought at first. Go ahead, sorry. Or is it AJB Smith?
Yeah, I think it's AJ Brown.
So,
yeah.
It's tough. I think I would want to go with the Eagles players. I don't like going all Eagles, though. I would rather have someone other than Devonta Smith as that third piece, to be honest with you, if I could. That would be my preference, is to see if there's another option there. But otherwise, to be honest with you, I think the 1-2 is going to be one of the quarterbacks. And I'm going to be honest, I only like Cam Ward. I'm not a Shedeur guy. I'm just going to be honest with you. So for me, I just don't. Okay.
It's JSN, so it's not Devonta Smith. It is JSN.
Okay, so that does actually change it for me. I think I'm okay with just going with that, because like I said, to me the only Cam Ward matters, Genty matters, McMillan matters. McMillan, I think you can probably get at 104 or 105 if you wanted to come up, or regardless, he's a reach at 102. That's the end of the conversation. So if you're desperate running back, I'd stick at 102 and take Genty. Otherwise, I think I'd rather just have the verified quarterback in Hurts over Love. AJ Brown's the best other player in that deal. And Smith and Najigba, I don't know. I like that trio more.
Yeah. And Tyler Bradley agrees with you, by the way. So now we'll get out of here on that note. Make sure you guys check us out on the Fantasy Football Advice Network on our YouTube channel. Hit the bell notification if you haven't already done so to get notified whenever we have new content for you. You can check out Operation Domination Football on your favorite podcast apps. We'll be back next Wednesday at 9:30. And everyone, good luck. Chaz, as you always like to say,
You'll always be cashing.
always be cashing. See you next week. Hey there, I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.